Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ACFID's Climate Action Policy Writeshop. We're really excited to welcome you here for what is a bit of a new approach for us here, and hoping it'll be a really useful session today, and then again next week in session 2. So just would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge where I'm calling in from today. I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where we are based, and pay respects also to the traditional owners of the lands where you are based as well, and pay our respects to elders both past, present and emerging. We extend this respect to any First Nations or other Indigenous people who are present today, and we recognise that respect for traditional knowledge and promoting the rights of First Nations communities must be at the heart of responding to the climate crisis, and hoping that you're able to mark Reconciliation Week sometime this week with a theme more now than ever. The agenda for today is we'll be looking at the objectives of the Writeshop, touching briefly on the ACFID Code of Conduct and the climate-related elements of that. Then thinking about the importance of climate action being documented in our organisations, and then getting into some nitty-gritty about how we can include climate action in our policies in quite a sort of tangible, documented way. Then we'll be doing some planning for next week. As I think you're probably all aware, this is a 2-part Writeshop, and we're meeting this same time next week for session 2. Some people that you may see on the call that are familiar faces, maybe for some of you over the past few months. We have from the University of Technology Sydney Institute for Sustainable Futures, Anna and Tazrina, if you'd like to give a wave. They've been helping us with our work for a while. From the ACFID Secretariat, we've got myself and Emily Morton, the Effectiveness Engagement Director. And we also have with us the steering group who's helped direct some of this work from the Development Practice Committee, the Climate Action Group, maybe on the call Charlotte, Dan, Belinda, Steph and Jess, who are from our membership and been helping to guide this work, and also the Climate Action Peer Learning Program. If you could also just pop into the chat your name, your organisation, and if you would prefer to be a dolphin or a sea eagle, would be great to know, to learn a little bit more about you. And if you would also potentially like to adjust, make sure that your name in your Zoom account shows your name and possibly your organisation as well, just as we'll be interacting a lot with each other and it can make it easier to know who you are talking to. Thanks, and I'll let you keep adding into the chat who you are, your organisation, and which of those animals you would rather be. The objectives for today. Yep.
Just had Nicola raise her hand from ACFID.
Sorry, thanks, Nicola. Maybe it's an accidental hand.
Oh, maybe it's accidental.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was an accidental hand. Sorry, I was trying to work out how to put my full name on there, but I'll just work that out later.
No worries. Okay, so for the objective for today is to sort of create a collaborative space for ACFID members to come together to work on whether it be drafting or revising your policies related to climate action. They may be other policies documents, they could be environmental sustainability documents, they could be other procedures and internal processes, to learn from each other and to learn a bit about best practice, to identify some key themes that we might want to be committing to as organisations for climate action and the key elements of a policy. And hopefully, particularly in our second session, is to share and provide with feedback to each other on our documentation. A little bit of housekeeping and a few other things to be aware of is, so just if we can remember that I think most of us on the call are not experts in this space, and some of us are not particularly confident in the area of climate action. So please be aware that you're amongst people, like-minded people. Be ready to share your ideas, and also be, if you could really try and be supportive of each other and what each other are bringing, so we can be more open and productive in our sessions. If you're able to keep your cameras on, that would also be great. It's a really interactive session, so it's nice to be able to see each other and who we're talking to. And please be ready to engage and contribute. There'll absolutely be breakout sessions and group discussions. So yeah, we really appreciate if you can get in on that and put a bit of effort into to keep those group discussions going, so we can all get the most out of it. the other thing to take note of, after the 2 sessions, we will also be using what comes out of this Writeshop to develop a guidance note on developing a climate action policy as well. So that will be an end result that we will all be contributing to. The other thing just to note, and this will be familiar for those of us, some of us on the call have been part of the Climate Action Peer Learning Program, and these are some principles that we've been utilising throughout those sort of 3 months of that work. But something for us to all come back to today is we're just requesting that everyone who's participating to really prioritise mutual understanding, shared aspirations, open dialogue and constructive criticism to each other, so we can all do the best we can in combating climate change. And we really want to understand and respect both the possibilities and constraints associated with each other's working environments, to both sort of challenge each other and understand where we're all coming from. And if there is any sort of sensitive information, internal organisational information shared by each other during the process, just remember that we won't be disclosing that outside of the Writeshop, and we won't be sharing documentational information unless we've got permission from the person who shared that. Any questions about any of that sort of housekeeping or the way we'll be working together? No? Great. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emily to share a little bit about the code and some of the climate-related revisions to it that's happened recently.
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everyone. Really wonderful to be with you today. So as many of you know, ACFID's code has been revised and the new code will come into effect at the end of June. And I guess we wanted to share, I know that many of you here will be familiar with the changes to the code, but we thought it was really important just to set the scene a little bit at the start of these 2 workshops, I guess to give you some framing guidelines as well about what the code is requiring, so that you can kind of have that in the back of your mind as you start looking through your different documentation and thinking about what you might need to get in place for your organisation as well. So I guess this is kind of part of both the Climate Peer Learning Program, but I know there are also others of you on the call today who are coming at this from, I guess, a more code of conduct and compliance point of view. So hopefully this will be some really useful and practical workshops for you and help you to meet some of those new requirements in the code as well. Can I just maybe get a quick thumbs up of people who are on the call if you did attend one of the sort of code roadshow events quite recently? Can I see any thumbs up? You might have come in person. I can see a few people there. Fantastic. I see some familiar faces as well, which is great. So some of this might be covering the same kind of ground for you, but hopefully we'll get into the details a bit more as well. Thanks, Anne. So the first thing, as I said, I just wanted to go through quickly some of the things that your organisation will be required to have in terms of the sort of documentation around climate action. So within the Code of Conduct, there are what we call verifiers, and these outline the evidence or the ways that your organisation will demonstrate that you're meeting the requirements in the code. So the first piece of evidence related to climate action here is in the blue box, and your organisation is required to have a policy, a statement or a guidance document that commits your organisation to promoting environmental sustainability, climate action, and improved environmental outcomes in your development and humanitarian initiatives. And so this is an existing requirement, but the change has been to include climate action as part of this now quite explicitly. So I guess what is covered here will be kind of core to what we're discussing in these workshops as well. There's also a requirement to have some kind of policy statement or guidance document around minimising the environmental impact, including the carbon footprint of your organisation. And that's more focused around your internal operations. So I guess you can kind of see this as both the work that your organisation does in terms of development humanitarian work, as well as how you operate internally as an organisation. Lots of people have asked, do we have to have multiple documents? The code is very agnostic about how and where you document your commitments. You might already have policies in place and you want to update them. You might have a guidance document, you might have short statements. It really depends on, I guess, the size and the way that your organisation structures your own organisational commitments. So that's just something to keep in mind through these workshops as well. So we will be talking about possibilities of what you could include and how you could structure it, but you'll need to think about what will work for your organisation and how that fits into your existing sort of policy structure as well. Thanks, Anne. So the other kind of piece of documentation that you'll need to be thinking about is less about the policy and more about your sort of design and planning tools, templates, the ways that you work, no matter how your organisation documents it. You will have some kind of process in place around your design and planning. And these now need to include evidence of the analysis of environmental risk and management. And this includes risks associated with climate change. So this has been explicitly drawn out. So as part of this process, you might also like to go and have a look at some of your design and planning frameworks or tools and think about, in terms of risk management, how you're capturing the risks associated with climate change in that. I know that's a huge topic in itself, but just flagging that's the kind of documentation you might want to be reviewing as well. And the other one in here, in terms of your design and planning processes and documentation, is around how you do your contextual analysis. So making sure that that includes the impacts of climate change as well. Thanks, Anne. And so the final third piece of documentation, I guess, again, is related to the last one, but is really about your organisation's risk frameworks. So making sure that some of you have a really specific risk framework for each program that you might work with. You might have an overarching organisational risk framework. But however you document it at the moment, making sure that this includes an assessment and ways that you're going to address risks for your humanitarian and development initiatives, and making sure that that includes risks associated with climate change. So again, you might want to think about this as part of that design and planning process as well. So those are all of the requirements in the code. So those are the verifiers that have been updated in relation to climate action. We also have a range of good practice indicators. And those of you familiar with the code will know that these aren't required, but they're a way that you can start thinking about those next steps for your organisation. So if we jump to the next slide, and there's a series of them here. I won't go through them all. You will have access to the slides very shortly, and you can have a look yourself. But I do encourage you to think through these, and you'll see in the yellow boxes off to the side there, we've tried to give you some suggestions of perhaps if you are looking at reviewing your policies or documentation, some of the good practice indicators might be things that you could articulate in those policies if you wanted to pursue them as an organisation. Again, these are not mandatory, but you might as an organisation decide that, yes, we would like to kind of think through having a focal person whose responsibility is that, and how would you make sure that that's documented in your policies. For some of you, you will already be meeting these. Most of these are not new. I've included all of them that might relate to climate action or environmental sustainability more broadly. So you might need to do a quick check, but there are those ones. And on the next slide, there's another range of them. Quite a few of these do relate to reporting, and a couple of new ones in there, looking at, I guess, taking a more climate justice and equity approach to how you think about climate action. But as I said, you can take a look, and it might be something that's interesting or useful for your organisation to pursue as well. Thanks, Anne. So those of you who came to the Code Roadshow will know that we do have a bunch of resources out there for you to access in terms of understanding what the code requires. So I would really encourage you to take a look through these. If you want a 1-page or 2-page summary of what the code says about climate change, there's a new topic guide. Those of you in the peer learning program will be very familiar with the online resource hub. But we also have the Introduction to Climate Change and Development e-learning program. So if you have new staff or board members, people wanting to just have have that introduction to some of the terms and what we're talking about, that's a good one to start with as well. And of course, we've got our quality assurance framework as well. So you will be able to access the links to this as well. In terms of thinking through this policy Writeshop as well, it might be useful to take a look at some of the definitions that are used in the code. And if you wanted to adopt some of those, that might be a good starting point as well for you. So that's a quick rundown of all the different requirements around climate action in the code. I will just pause here for a moment and see if anyone had any questions just about those new requirements or things you wanted to clarify before we move on. Does anyone have any questions? You can put your hand up or come off mute, that's fine.
I have a quick question. Thanks for all of that. This is Chris Scovers from Habitat for Humanity Australia. Hi. Just in terms of the review of the DFAT accreditation process as well, which I think part of the logic for was to align more closely with the ACFID Code of Conduct. Have these code changes been applied with reference to what DFAT is doing in this space? Is DFAT kind of requiring more at this point around climate in the accreditation criteria as part of that review?
It's a really good question, Chris. So it certainly was a focus for us initially in terms of trying to bring the code into alignment with what DFAT required, where it was relevant for all ACFID members. So we have about half of our members are part of ANCP. So we were conscious that it needed to be removing that kind of duplication or where things were close already. So unfortunately, as you know, the sort of review of DFAT's accreditation criteria is in the process right now. And so we have already approved and made the changes to the code last year. So I couldn't tell you at the moment where they've landed in terms of any changes to their accreditation criteria as part of the refresh. We have had a lot of conversations with them about aligning and using the language of the code, and certainly those involved in updating the criteria are very familiar with ACFID's code. So they are very aware of what's now in here, but I couldn't tell you until we sort of see where they've landed with the new accreditation criteria.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful to know.
Yeah, and when it does come out, so we will do a lot of work then to sort of update the mapping and help members understand where those points of alignment are. And if there are differences, try and highlight those as well through the code documents.
Yeah, hopefully they'll do things as aligned as possible with what you're doing. History might otherwise.
Yeah, we shall see. Does anyone else have any other questions? No problem. And as always, please get in touch with the code team, code@acfid.asn.au, if you do have any questions just about what's required now under the new code. So we're just going to move on now and start getting your brains thinking about what you've come to these workshops with. And I can see that Anna's popped the link to the Google slides that we're going to be using today into the chat. So you will need to navigate to that right now. What we'd like you to do is have a think about the documents that you are wanting to either revise as part of this Writeshop process, or maybe documents that might be new. So we're really interested in understanding a bit more about where you're thinking about what this policy Writeshop might help you with, the types of documents that your organisation already has, and that will just help both you, hopefully, and us think through kind of where to pitch some of the activities as well. So if you want to jump into the Google slides, I can see there's quite a few of you in there at the moment. Just pop in your organisation's name, the name of the document, if it's an existing one, or maybe one that you think it will have if you're planning on creating a new one, the year, or if it's a draft or a published one as well, that would be great. We'll just give you a little bit of time to do that, and then we'll have a look through the types of documents that people are bringing.
Slides 19, 20, 21 and 22 are all the same. So you can navigate to any of those slides and pop in one of those sticky notes. They're duplicated just to allow people all the space they need to note their documents.
Thanks, Anna. And if you're coming today as well and you haven't had a chance to look yet, or you're not sure, that's okay. That will probably be a piece of homework for you before next week's session. Right, so I can see quite a few different ones in there. Excellent. Okay, it looks like we've got quite a few just sort of more general environmental sustainability policies, so things that you might already have had to have with the code as well, or with DFAT. So looking at both policy and guidance notes. Also some people wanting to look at their design frameworks as well, which is great. And a couple of organisations also mentioning climate change strategies as well, which might look like they might be kind of new documents as well. It's great. Some things maybe more specifically, including things around kind of carbon footprint and reporting on that a bit more. Yeah, again, looking at mainly at some different overarching policies where climate might be captured along with broader environmental sustainability. Yeah, checking existing ones meet the code. Brilliant. Oh, interesting. Someone's got in there as well around ethical and sustainable procurement policies. That's a different one as well. Risk assessments. Yeah, maybe some of the templates or processes there. Okay, looking at maybe some kind of capacity around climate capacity building, learning design. Good return. Excellent. And you might like to take a look in here as well and see if what other organisations are thinking about similar policies to you as well. Obviously, we have these two sessions together, but you know, the work continues after this as well. So you might make a note of maybe some organisations through these discussions that you can follow up with later as well, or through the community of practice. So that's great. It looks like we have some really different sort of approaches across the organisation, but broadly people are looking kind of more at policies. And also I see one in there around a theory of change, which is very interesting as well. So thank you for sharing that. If you are still in there and you're wanting to add things as you go, or you think of something else that your organisation has, please feel free to add that in. That's great. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Anna now to take us through the next section. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Emily. And we might go back to sharing if that's all right, just for these next few slides. So the next session I'm going to be talking you through, Emily's given a really good rundown and overview of the importance from the ACFID code perspective. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit more about why ACFID members should have a documented organisational policy on climate action and what the risks are of not doing so. So I've got a slide. It's quite detailed, so take a breath and we're going to go through it together. So this table shows, why it's important to integrate climate action in organisational policies, both from a visibility perspective and also a documentation perspective. So Emily, as I said, has just talked you through in terms of the ACFID code of conduct requirements. This will be important for ACFID members in terms of accreditation. And the risks of not doing so are obviously the flip side. There is the potential for not being able to be accredited if you don't align with the code. I think the next line down is important too, because what's written in your organisational statements, your organisational policy statements, really obviously provides a high-level overview of the values of your organisation. It also provides a mandate and a starting point for organisational climate action and endorsement at director level. So if you can imagine an organisation, even one like many on the call today, you might not have climate change as a core aspect of your work, of your programming. However, if you've included mention of climate change, climate action, and your organisation's commitment to climate action in your organisational statement, it provides that visibility of your values and understanding that climate action is important for all organisations. And it also provides sort of that trickle down across all your organisational activities and, potentially into programs and other actions, in terms of organisational actions like procurement, we heard just a moment ago, and that kind of thing. So it really provides that high level justification for climate action across all aspects of an organisation. And the risk of not having climate change included in organisational statements is that potentially climate action can be stalled because it's not visible and documented at that high level organisational policy level. The next one is around climate change being a human rights issue. This is well documented. You've probably already heard it. Climate change has the potential to erode all human rights. So visibility in an organisational statement acknowledges that addressing climate change does actually help to protect human rights of vulnerable communities. I'm sure just about everyone on the call in the international development sector, that's your MO. It's all about really, at its core, it's about human rights. And so that just acknowledges that climate change is a human rights issue. And on the flip side, again, the lack of documentation and visibility might seem like an oversight from a human rights perspective. The next one down, is around social license, and it also, there's a lot of connections to the human rights point, but I think this one, including climate change, provides a social license to operate and is around social performance, and that links to organisational reputation. And so if you have climate change visible in your organisational policy, it's important to maintain that social license to operate. It demonstrates strong social performance, and that has implications for reputation, the reputational benefits. And, again, on the flip side, it's sort of the opposite. If lack of documentation might seem like an oversight, I think, supporters and partners would really notice, I think, over time if climate change is not included. So there are reputational risks of inaction on that front from that social license perspective as well. The second to last row in the table is a bit more sort of on a pragmatic side. So climate change is already affecting or will affect your organisation, whether it's visible or invisible at the moment, or direct or indirect. And climate change is also affecting or will affect the communities and the stakeholders that you work with in the countries in which you work. So including climate change in your organisational policy statements and documentation positions your organisation to adapt to those emerging risks and function in these dynamic environments that climate change is really causing. It also demonstrates to partners that your organisation acknowledges climate change as an issue, and importantly, the climate impacts in the countries in which you work. Not doing so from an organisational perspective can actually put your organisation at risk. It has security implications, operations implications in terms of strategic focus, even things like health. The link between climate change and health is quite strong. So there are sort of, OH&S issues as well for staff working in countries that are acutely affected by climate change. So there's that level, but also ignoring climate change in organisational policies potentially puts programs at risk as well. To implementation, climate change really has the ability to erode the achievement of goals and objectives of programs as well. And lastly, the three principles included in ACFID's climate action framework for effective climate action are having an evidence base, and equity and inclusion. So just focusing on the evidence-based side, drawing on the evidence base really recognises that climate change has a huge impact on development. So doing so acknowledges to supporters, to partners, to governments that you are drawing on that very well evidence base. There's no denying the science and the impacts that I'm sure your partners and communities are experiencing. So yeah, again, it's sort of a bit around reputation and social license, but really it's just ensuring that you're operating from that evidence base. And on the flip side, again, ignoring the evidence base demonstrates a misalignment with that principle of effective climate action and ignoring the really strong evidence base. So I hope that just provides even greater justification of why it's important if you needed it. I'm sure people on the call, some might, and that's understandable and completely fine. But it is a process to really get your head around why it is important to both be visible and documented in your organisational policies. Oh, so that's a lot to take in. We'd like to move now to a little activity, a Menti. So you can either use your phone or perhaps we can just pop that link in the chat as well. Tasreen, if you don't mind doing that. Just if in case people want to do it on your computer. So there's just 2 questions there that we'd like you to respond to. One's a multiple choice and others open-ended. So we'll just give you a couple of moments to navigate to the Menti and then we'll have a look at the results all together. Okay, I'll just share this since it's on my computer. Just give people a moment to answer the second question. Great. All right. I'll just share the screen because there's some good results coming through. Am I sharing the right screen? That look okay? Yep. Okay, great. So as you can see, how easy would it be for your organisation to integrate climate action into its policies? We have 4 people say very easy, 19 say somewhat easy, 11 say somewhat difficult. No one says very difficult, so that's good news. And 4 are unsure. So that's, you know, probably a reasonable result based on where we are and everyone coming to the Writeshop today to really make a start or become more confident. So I think that's pretty encouraging that there are some that say, yeah, I think it'll be pretty easy. But others say, I think I'm going to need a bit of help. So, you know, that's why we're here today. The next question is, what might be some benefits of having climate action documented in your organisational policy? So there's 44 responses. So we don't have time to look through all of them, but people are saying accountability and monitoring, yep, meeting ACFID code and ANCP standards, whole of organisational common understanding, clear framework, something to be accountable for. So accountability is a big message that's coming through on this first screen. It helped to signal to our donors that this is a priority for us in the health space, keeping us focused over time. It mandates the organisation, clarity, risk mitigation, organisational buy-in. I think that's a really important one, and it's sort of repeated in a few different points. Clarity and ensuring principles are integrated at all stages of project lifecycle. We already feel strongly about wanting to do more. This would create accountability. Yep. So I'll just give you a moment to just run your eye over some of these responses as I scroll down. Consistency and compliance, a clear public stance. So really good diversity of views there, but also some clear messaging around accountability and sort of a common goal, a common message from the organisation. Did anyone want to reflect on that from your own organisation's perspective, or any questions before we move on? This is all really interesting, and we will share this in the slides, and you'll have access to this at the end, because I think this is quite interesting, just different perspectives on why it's important, what the benefits are. Any comments before we move on? No, that's okay. All right. I think I'm taking us through the next session as well, so I'll keep going. Thanks, Anne, for jumping back into the slides. So the next session is a bit more about the how, which I'm sure you're all very eager to jump into. So how can climate action be included in policies? So what we wanted to talk through first, and I've sort of alluded to this already in what I've mentioned, is the importance of integrating or including climate change into sort of an overarching organisational statement or commitment. So if we can just jump to the next slide, please, Anne. And so we'll provide a couple of examples in a moment, but as you can imagine, and I'm sure you're all aware of in your own organisational policies, there's sort of a starting statement about the values and sort of the main aims and objectives of your organisation and why you do what you do. So what should be included in a statement or commitment in terms of climate change? So the statement should articulate the purpose and justification of including climate change. Climate change will likely be included in the introduction section of the policy to outline the overarching aim of the policy's focus and why your organisation cares about climate change. How does it link to your aims and objectives and the sort of the goals that your organisation aims to achieve? So we've got a few examples from organisations, some of which might be on the call today. So thank you for allowing us to use your organisation as an example. As you can see here, I don't expect you to read everything, but this is Child Fund Australia's environmental sustainability policy. So, you know, you can imagine and you can sort of read there. Child Fund obviously is a child-focused organisation. So that's sort of the core objective to support child rights and child-led development. So in the green here, you can see Child Fund Australia understands that it contributes to the depletion of natural resource stocks due to greenhouse gases our activities produce. The consequences of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere are global warming, a changing climate beyond the extent to which has been evidenced previously, a worsening of the vulnerability context in which Child Fund Australia beneficiaries live, caused by more frequent and severe natural shocks and the depletion of livelihood assets. So I think that's a really great example of both linking the issue and the science of climate change, acknowledging Child Fund itself, you know, we're all part of this problem. And so Child Fund is acknowledging that, but also importantly, acknowledging the Child Fund Australia and the place the beneficiaries live and the fact that they are particularly vulnerable. So that's a good example of how climate change has already been included in Child Fund Australia's policy. The next slide is Tier Fund. Tier Fund's environmental policy. And so this is a faith-based organisation, as you can see from the first line. So that's important for Tier Fund to put in its organisational environmental policy. And in green, you can see, while climate change affects the whole world, it is those in poor and vulnerable communities who feel its impact most severely. And Tier Fund's partners across the world highlight the theme of climate change impacting their work and community. Tier Fund is inspired by its vision of biblical justice to approach the challenges of a changing climate in ways that seek to ensure that everyone is able to meet their needs, that we live within environmental limits, that everyone lives fairly and has their fair share. This approach is consistent with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So again, acknowledging Tier Fund's faith-based basis and how climate change is important for that particular organisation. The final example we have for you is the Australian Himalayan Foundation's environmental management policy. So there's a lot here. I'm not going to read all of it, but similarly, this organisation also has included climate change and the fact that climate change affects the most vulnerable populations most acutely, and why that's important to this particular organisation, including in the location, the geographic locations in which they work, given it's a place-based organisation. So hopefully that gives a bit of food for thought for you as well. And we've got an activity now. We're going to pop you in breakout rooms, and we'd like you to talk with each other about what resonated with you and your organisation from the examples provided, and what is missing from the examples provided. What's more relevant for your organisation? So at this point in time, we're not asking you to start drafting anything, but it's sort of the seeds of that. We'd really like you to start thinking about what might be the text and the content through those discussions that you have with your fellow breakout room participants. So if there's any questions before we jump into rooms, please raise them now, but you'll be swept away into a breakout room shortly. I'm just looking at the slides. We're also asking each group just to note down on those Google slides from 32 to 37. So if you're in breakout room 1, if you can go to slide 32, as you can see, it says group 1. If you're in group 2, if you can go to slide 33, and so et cetera, et cetera. So you should be able to tell which breakout room you're in. It should be a name. And then if you can go to your particular slide in the slide deck and just note down any discussions that you have, any content that starts to come to mind as you answer those questions on slide 31. I hope that's clear. You'll have about 10 minutes. So we look forward to welcoming you back, in a few minutes' time. Thanks for coming back. It would be good just to hear from each group, or whichever groups are happy to share, just some key points that you talked about. I can see some really good content in the Google slides. Thank you for adding that if you're able to. Does someone from group 1, slide 32, want to just share a key point that you talked about?
Sure, and I'm happy to do that. Most of the content was given by the group and not me. So I'm just the voice of what we discussed. I think a couple of key points that stuck out was one, in that overarching statement, giving specific reference to the location in which your work, so where your work has impact or makes a difference, and acknowledging that acknowledging the types of impacts that will be felt there. So in some regions that would be, say, coastal erosion and sea level rise, or in other areas potentially flooding or bushfires, so specific climate change impacts, and then also recognising that those impacts will be felt more acutely and exacerbate the vulnerabilities of people living in that location.
Yeah.
And something that one of us noticed was kind of missing was how you, but we should include in an org statement, is what strengths your organisation has. So what are the specific strengths of your organisation and the role that they will play, ensuring that was reflected.
Love that. Those of you who know me and our research at ISF, we're all about strengths-based approach. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. You do have strengths, and it's important to leverage those for climate change. Great. Thank you so much, Julie. We probably don't have time to go through all of the groups, but does anyone else want to share? It'd be great to hear from a couple more. We've got time if anyone has anything different that they talked about. think group 7 had a lot. Can I pick on group 7? There was a really interesting content in there. Someone from group 7 willing to speak?
I'm not sure how well I'll sort of cover the discussion, but I think some of the key things that came up were we liked how they're kind of linked that vulnerable groups are the most impacted by climate change in the policies we looked at. We looked at sort of making sure that we were detailing the things that we have control over and sort of linking with organisations that could support sort of in-country partners that we could work with in the space, and looking at community resilience, because that was kind of a key thing. A lot of us work in sort of health or sort of women's rights. So building resilience and that sort of thing, to include that in sort of the policy statement. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. It's really good to see, yeah, lots of good discussion happening in that group. Anyone else want to share before we move on? Very happy to have one more group present. If there's anything different that your group talked about that we haven't heard yet.
I might just build on from what Ellie just said. I think we're talking so far a lot about what climate change means for your organization individually and how your organization will respond and what your organization will do. And I think one of the purposes of having a clear purpose statement, I suppose, is to help establish potential points of connection with other organizations. That we're all, the climate challenge is very complex, actually, and operating in isolation is not going to work. We're all going to achieve some things and reduce some vulnerabilities, but climate vulnerabilities are multifaceted and multi-sectoral, and they relate to food security and agriculture and housing and water and sanitation and all sorts of things. And most of our organizations, have a certain specialization, and we can address certain of those types of vulnerabilities that exist around climate. But I think having a clear outline of what your organization can do and how that can connect with what other organizations are doing, to have a more holistic and more comprehensive, integrated approach to building climate resilience. I think that's really important, especially for everybody on this call, is to think about what we're doing with our policies insofar as how they can interface with other organizations and their policies and their work moving forward.
Excellent point. Thanks so much for that, Chris. Yeah, very much on board with that integrated approach to resilience building and climate action. It's a multi-stakeholder, multifaceted response that's going to be needed. All right, thanks for that activity. I believe, am I passing to you now, Tazrina, for the next activity? Great, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we go back to sharing screen, please? That's the one. So first of all, I think I was talking about that in group 6, and then I was sent back to the main session. So sorry about that, group 6. So this session, we would like to delve a little bit deeper into the elements of policy in action to explore the practical aspects and applications of policy implementation. Policy in action may include different elements, and some examples of elements are provided here, as you can see. It's, I think, slide 37. it's slide 40, sorry, slide 40 on the Google slide. So I will not go through all of them, but some of the policy in action, like some of the elements may include approach to organizational risk, which could include considering how climate change is risk to organizations, programs, operations, assets, and stuff. Reducing environmental impact of operations in Australia can be one element of policy in action. For example, thinking about or be mindful of procurement, energy, water use in workspace. So this kind of things could be potential elements in policy in action that could be included in policy. So the goal of this breakout room activity that we are going to do in a while is to create a menu of climate action integration options. And at this stage, we will just focus on identifying the potential elements that could be integrated. And we won't have enough time to determine that which part in the policy these options will be in or should occur. But we will just think about what could be some potential elements. So the breakout room we will be doing is will be like organized in a wild cafe style. So each group will be assigned to a slide to work on. And once you have completed your thoughts on the slide, you can move on to the next slide to see if there's anything more you can contribute. Say, for example, if someone is assigned to work on slide 42, as you can see, slide 42 says that to consider things like approach to organizational risk, and you can think about some options that links to this element. And after you finish working on this slide, then you can move on to breakout room 2, the next slide, and you can see what the other group has done and add into it. Or maybe if you feel like that's something that you can add there, just add some notes and then move on to the next slide. So we will do it like one by one, and once we will go through all the slides until breakout room 8 or whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure how many group will be, but yeah, we will go until the very end. Some people, like some of you will start from group 6 or 7. So same thing, like 6, then go to 7, 8, and then once you have done, then go to group breakout room 1 again. So we will go in this way so that we cover all the slides and we have a chance to look at all the slides and put input across different slides. So I think that's the activity we are aiming to do. Any questions before we move on to the breakout room? Yes, Karen, I can see your hand.
Yeah, I just was wondering if you could give us an example on one of, just so if we look at slide 42, for example, what would be an example of an element that we might write on that slide?
So I think that that could be something like maybe thinking about how organizations' operations could be like risk could be reduced. Say, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe thinking about carbon offsetting could be there, or thinking about like having a carbon calculator and think about how to reduce the risk of organizations' operations. So yeah, stuff like that.
And also, if I can just jump in, I think thinking about what people were just talking about in terms of the location, like, you know, organizational risks to staff in certain locations. So in the previous exercise, people were talking a bit about, you know, the geography of where their organization operates. So what are the risks to the operations of staff? You know, are cyclones going to be more frequent? So is the office building in Solomon Islands more at risk of cyclones because of climate change? So that kind of thing, thinking about the risks to the organization and its staff and how it operates. Just while I'm talking, if there's anything that you think, any other headings, any other dot points that you think we've missed, please include that in the slides as well, just on one of the sticky notes. Just flag it as something else that you think as you go through some of the parts of the policy where climate change could be included, because this is a non-exhaustive list. This is just a starting point, some ideas of where you might start to include climate action in your policies. hopefully that makes sense. Tazrina, are you leading us through a sort of a wrap up now, or do you?
No, I think we have just 5 minutes, so we might not have enough time for plenary. So I might
I think it'd be good to hear. No, it'd be good to hear just a couple, I think,
Okay.
of comment groups.
Yeah,
if
sure.
people are willing.
Anyone would like to share what your group discussed and yeah, what you found interesting? I can see group 4 is still writing. Anyone would like to share your discussion on from group 4?
Oh, it doesn't sound like people are
Okay.
willing. That's okay.
Okay. I think
do you
we had a
mind-
great conversation in group 7. Julie or anyone else would like to discuss a little bit about staff engagement and the discussion we had?
I'm happy to say something.
Great, thank you.
Just off the top of my head, something that we're identifying is how translating a policy into meaningful action, it's a cultural shift, but there's also obviously training that's required. And, you know, it's really helpful to have guidance notes and that sort of thing. Sorry, I've lost my chain of thought. I think where we kind of get stuck is that a lot of us can't afford climate experts and we're all kind of self-taught. There's a lot of people having to juggle, you know, integration of other cross-cutting issues, you know, JEDI and safeguarding into their projects and reluctant to fully embrace this or not having the time or the budget to do so. So that cultural shift and ensuring meaningful change can be a little bit challenging sometimes, which is where the staff training comes in to equip people to help them to feel more, for that to be a more natural and simple process to pop on that climate lens in everything that we do. But also noting that, that a lot of the, I suppose, webinars and sessions and information that has become available around climate change and development has showcased some really amazing examples, but very much around projects that are doing climate change projects specifically, and just not so much kind of understanding or examples or support around integrating climate change into everything you do, where your organizational project focus is not specifically climate change. And so, you know, sometimes when we're trying to be self-taught and then pass on that knowledge and integrate it into policies, you know, it can, you can question yourself a lot.
Great. Can I just jump in there? I think that's such an important point, Julie. And hopefully today's session was helpful to start to hear from other like-minded organisations. The ACFID Climate Action Portal, I think it's called, has a lot of resources, case studies and that kind of thing. And I'll just post in the chat just a reminder that also the ACFID Climate Action Framework has a lot of really good information as well. So I just continue to point you to that document and familiarise yourself with it, because from a non-climate perspective, there's some good examples of how to go about that. I realise the time. I think we'll just pass to Anne to take us through the next steps.
Thanks, Anna and Tazrina, and thanks everyone for that really great work in your groups together. So for next steps, first thing is check in your calendars that you have the meeting for next week, same time next week. If you don't, shout out and we can make sure you've got that link. And what we'd really like you to do is start potentially some drafting. If you could be bringing to next week's session the documents that you've mentioned that you're working on, where you think these fits, whether it be one policy or a few different documents where these elements fit in. And if you're able to do some starting revisions on them, and it may just be dot points, it can be really draft, even just headings of what you think you might want to be adding in or including. The other thing as well, we know that you can't just write a policy and give it to your organisation. Have a think about the processes you might be needing to take, or your organisation will need to take to have updated documentation in place? Is it consulting with partners? Is it consulting with other sort of compliance issues you're connected with, or talking to different staff? So have a think as well about the processes you might need to take to get those policies in place. In next week's session, we'll be sharing those amongst some groups and helping each other with the drafting of that, doing a bit more writing. We'll also hear from some other organisations about their documentation and be able to learn from them as well. Any questions about what's expected sort of coming into next week's session?
And we could also mention that we have a question parking lot. So if anyone has any question, please feel free to put your question there and we can discuss it next week.
Thanks, Tazarina. And yeah, the slides will remain open. So if you even think of some other things to add to those slides, feel free to drop them in. But yeah, just really want to thank you for a really engaged session. It was just great to have everyone contributing so collaboratively and that we can all learn from each other. And looking forward to seeing you next Thursday.